All right, I'm just going to hit record. I hope for the best. All right,
So,
so I'm with Jake Belcher, the guy that started Radio Titans with me, and we're going to talk all about Grand Theft Audio and the Hollywood year and all that stuff, and find out about his life leading into all this. I'm just going to go ahead and start shooting questions at you.
good
So,
morning.
so for me, um, I like my hero growing up from like age 9 on was David Letterman. Who, if anyone, inspired you to want to get into showbiz and talk shows and whatnot?
I mean, I was a giant Stern fan for sure. I'd been listening to him for about a decade then. And I think that it kind of carried over into our show, just asking irreverent things that other people wouldn't ever have the balls to get to. I mean, when we sat there, we asked Carlos Mencia about stealing jokes. Like, I don't know that he'd been publicly questioned on a live platform like that was going out to the world. And so I took a lot of my inspiration from Howard Stern for sure.
Would you say I didn't even remember about Mencia, but that's funny. Just going out of order here on this. Uh, do you recall? Was he like kind of was he flabbergasted by the question, or
He,
did he handle it
he was
okay?
he was taken aback for sure. Like he did not he expected us to just kind of think kiss his butt like most people do. Like, and he came in there and we had debated, should we talk about it? Should we talk about it? And then like about 2 weeks before, the South Park episode came out that was calling him on it. So I looked at him and I used the joke from South Park. And I'm like, do you like fish sticks? And he knew instantly where I was going with it. And like he leaned into it. To be fair, I think it was a lot more honest in his response to us than I've seen him on other people. He seems a lot more prepared now. Like I've seen him on other podcasts over the last decade, and I've seen a few people ask him about it. And I think that we got the most honest answer out of him. You go back and find it; it's pretty good.
Okay, so then how did you? Okay, so I got the idea to do talk radio because of our former colleague Mike Nagami, and I explained that, or we talk about it in his interview, but I remember bringing you in. My recollection was that I reached out to you because you were this funny, wildly irreverent guy, and I was afraid that Mike and I on our own might not quite have the spark to make it fly, because even though he had a great idea and got me interested in this, he was an accountant, and I was worried that we needed somebody to give an extra comedy oomph, and that's my recollection of why I asked you to join. I don't know if you have a different memory of that.
I think it definitely was to just kind of bring on some fun to it. It'd be hard for me to guess what your guys' motivation was, just because I wasn't that part of that conversation. But I always just assumed it was because I was fun and like it was just good to get some laughs on the show. I mean, not that you're not fun too. I mean, you're your entire personality on yourself. Like we definitely have contrasting styles on things. You're so conservative and those things, and some of the things I did on the air were pretty shocking to you at the time. Like I remember the time that I tried to sell your soul to the devil on the air so that we could have rating success, and the way you freaked out on that, like it was better than like just sitting there and agreeing with things. Like I think part of what made us work is that we just didn't agree on everything. We had some overall philosophies on life, on treating people right and stuff, but like we just view the world from completely different directions.
So one thing I'm describing in the pitch letters, I created a really cool pitch letter. I got to send you and the other Jake, just for UKitch, and then there's somebody else that's trying to help line up money for us. And I said that behind it all was a Catholic conservative. I described you as a libertarian atheist, or would you be agnostic, or
No, I
neither?
believe in God. I believe in
Oh, okay.
God. I'm not an atheist for sure. I mean,
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, the other guy say Bowman's a hippie Christian, which that's what he is. But okay, so So I'll say so libertarian what? Any other, how would you describe yourself
Um,
in a
I,
nutshell?
I hate church. Like, I think that it's kind of for people who just need to be led by the nose to things. So I'm a spiritual person. Like, I sit under a tree and I talk to God all the time, but I'm not going to go to church. So like, I would say that I am a Christian. I mean, I'm just not someone who's part of a dogma
Oh,
or
okay, gotcha. All right, well
yeah.
then I could change that for the letters. Um, okay, so then what was your first impression of I don't know of being asked to do this? What was your impression of me? And you can say, I don't mean literally an impression, although I'm sure you have one, but uh, and I need to have you ask that so I can talk about you at some point like this. But when you were asked, were you totally into it from the beginning, or were you like, oh God, I don't know about these guys, or what?
It's something that I had been thinking about doing for a long time. Like, someone said to me a few years ago that, Jake, you're so funny, you should charge admission. And I was just trying to figure out some way of like, being entertaining. And at that time, I was kind of caught in like, and not the corporate shit, but like the business stuff of like selling ads for like this series of newspapers and stuff. You know who they are. But like I was just caught in a rut, and you came to me with this idea, and I'm like, I went home to my girlfriend at the time, and I'm like, hey, what do you think of this? And she's like, you need an outlet. You need to get like your words out someplace. So follow this and do it. And I jumped in pretty head first, and we had just such incredible success at the beginning. The way that things just steamrolled, that it really rolled out of hand very quickly. I mean, we just kind of went from this place that we were paying to learn how to do it to being on the air and being in LA Times, it just kept going bigger and bigger and bigger to the point that it's probably my favorite thing that I've just jumped in on and done that I had no right to do at all. We had no right to do this. I mean, we were just some suckers who were, in the right place at the right time in many ways, but we had a good formula between us, but we had no right to be doing it at all.
So, um, any thoughts on American Radio Network? Me and Nagami both have given some funny remembrances of that operation and its high quality.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I mean, they couldn't tell us like hardly anything. They'd tell us it was airing somewhere, and we'd try to tune in to see what was going on. We get these weird reports that it's on. Oh, it's going to be on in Honolulu at 2 a.m. on our network. Like, great. Well, how do we tune in to get signals from Honolulu? Like the whole world was completely different than now. Then, because you'd be able to pull up those stations now online and be able to see, okay, I guess this is actually playing. But at the time, we just kind of had to believe them, and we would just have these ridiculous things they would make us do. Like, we were playing these commercials for products that didn't even really exist anymore. I remember they had this commercial for a Pringles flavor that hadn't been on the market in like 2 years or something. So we're playing these commercials, and I'm just sitting there thinking, who could this possibly benefit? But I mean, it was a wild adventure. There were so many crazy people at that place. The guy that ran the place, that was just never like, I don't think he ever stood up. I think he just rolled around on that chair all day long from like one area to the other. And I loved it. I'm glad that we did it. But it was so antiquated. The stuff that we were learning off of was stuff that was top notch about 20 years before. I mean, we were literally recording things onto like cassette tapes. I mean, it was it was antiquated for sure. And
Okay.
then there was just crazy with all the homeless people around it. And I think that was the first time that I ran across. This was a running epidemic at every place. There would always be like used sex toys on the ground outside of our studio. I remember like going through there, and like there was like some, I guess, some like dildos on the ground. Like at our next studio, we found like a used pocket man pleasure. I mean, this was like, Hollywood was a disgusting place.
Well, and you missed out on. I once had a conversation with the manager of the downtown office where she was calling me in for her bi-monthly scolding and was like, Mr. Kozlowski, we even found a used condom in one of the conference room trash cans. Do you know
Well,
anything about that?
I mean, that's better than just being on the floor. So like,
I know. Like,
you should have
anyway,
said thanks.
so um, then before we got on KBC, we experimented with shows taped at the House of Pies, a City of LA bus, and in Butch Bradley's apartment. Any thoughts or memories of those? And try, if you have thoughts and memories of each of those, let's try to break it up where you pause for a second, and I'll take each one, I guess, because that'll make it easier to edit. Any thoughts of the House of Pies trial episode?
The House of Pies was it was a fun idea. I liked the idea of taking the show out into the street, into the real world. I think there was a lot of idea there also that was kind of Howard Sternian to me, of just being out and around real people. The one that we did in the offices of our old work was probably my favorite, just because it was the first time that we actually sat down and tried. And you could kind of feel right then that, oh, this could be fun. I can make fun of Carl. Carl can kind of defend himself in some outrageous way, like that he got all huffy and stuff. And people seem to like that stuff. I mean, the most feedback I would get back on things was like me making fun of you or arguing and stuff. So that was pretty obvious from the beginning. So it was more about how our flow was together. One thing that you forget about that we recorded in there, that it's the only show that I don't have. I mean, I literally have everything from our ARN shows to those shows. The only thing I don't have is the show that we did at Lampoon Radio at yeah, I guess it was just what's the full name of Lampoon? Harvard
National
Lampoon
Radio Network.
National Lampoon Radio Network. That one felt good because that was the first time that we sat down with professional equipment. You know, up until that point, it had just been in front of like your little hand recorder, and we kind of pass things back or set it in the middle of the table. But the first time that we actually got to sit down and, you know, have a studio engineer who got to like pay attention to what we were doing and making sure our mic levels were right, like that felt really good. One other thing that I really liked about that phase was there was no idea of like this being something that we really thought was going to work. So I think that we threw a whole bunch of just kind of crazy out there with just the idea of, well, let's see what this does and let's see what this does. And that led us towards more exploratory things of like, you know, keeping things very like prepared, making sure I never wanted to have like conversations with you before we went on the air, because like I didn't want to, you know, spoil the spontaneity of it. So getting through all of that stuff and getting to learn that you can't have the same conversation genuinely twice, it was all so valuable.
Yeah. Any thoughts about Butch Bradley's apartment?
Yeah, I remember going there. I remember thinking, oh man, this is a real comic and stuff. And somehow that was one of the first times where, and I had this feeling so many times, that man, I don't deserve to be here. Like I haven't done anything. Like this is a real stand-up comic. These are real businesses. These are real people. And like I was just kind of some sucker who was going along for the side ride, and got to have some of the best adventures ever.
Okay, and then the city bus. That to me, what blows my mind looking back on that was, well, one thing that Butch said about his apartment, in case this sparks a further thought, was he said that he thinks we were so beyond cutting edge that nobody, he said, he goes, when you said, hey, can I come over to your apartment and host a talk show for an hour? I was like, what the hell? You know, that was his reaction. He's saying is that he was thinking, what the hell? Why do these guys want to go to somebody's apartment to do a talk show? And then he said, and then that's how the whole world does it ever now, you know. And
Sure.
then the to me, my favorite experiment was the bus, because that was what was amazing there. It was not only the audacity of trying to do a talk show on a bus, but if I recall, I don't remember who got on where, but I'm pretty certain that we had at least one of the guests, or at least one of the designated official audience members, get on along the route, like hop on in Glendale. And that to me is the funniest thing in the world, that we had people actually have to time themselves to get on
Sure.
the bus along the way. And then I managed to track down JB, the bus driver, who's going to be in this project. And that was pretty wild. Like, he totally remembered us.
I mean, it'd be hard to forget a show going on like on your bus for sure. We did some fun stuff there, man. It was just the whole idea of not being like everybody else and not doing the same thing that saw. So part of the thing is we both came from a news background, and I hated the way that like things were being presented by everything, and I wanted so badly to just rebel against like the norm stuff, that the whole idea of doing something different that you hadn't seen before was super enticing to me. I really loved doing that bus one. I remember getting off, and then we went to the Dresden room afterwards, and we sat there just thinking about other places that we could possibly do this. And from that, I think literally it was like a week later till like we were fantasizing about everywhere we can go. Like a week later, you hit me up with this idea that we could be on KABC, and like that threw everything out of like the idea of experimenting. That just went with, holy shit, this could be like a real freaking thing that we do.
Yeah. So, what was our goal with those tapes? Because we didn't have anywhere to play them, right? We were just
We
doing it to do it, right?
we had brought them to the first station that we thought we were going to be on. I think it was
Oh,
KLA.
KRLA. Yeah.
Yeah, and those guys, like they were not polite to us. Now they said you can't have a three-person show. Like you can't have three voices in studio. Like it just doesn't work. Like you can have two-man shows, but like three guy voices just don't work. And then we sent them over like I think a couple of our like sample tapes, and one of them got to them, and they said, "Wow, okay, it actually sounds like you guys have found a way to make three voices work together." And then we went over there and we tried to make that all go, but I think they were a little too conservative.
They were. Yeah. They got scared because I called Sarah Palin a sexy librarian, and they actually took offense at that.
Yeah, I mean that was
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So how did the idea of the title, because I'm sure it was you, the title of Grand Theft Audio, come up, and the concept, like what when it was, we suddenly had to have an official, oh my God, we're on the air. We had to have a format. Any memories of how that came about?
So I'd say it was kind of an amalgamation of ideas that like we were. I loved video games, so like it just felt like GTA was already such a strong thing out in society that I thought we could just kind of change it from auto to audio. But I really felt like we were stealing, like it was Grand Theft Audio. I mean, like we didn't deserve to be there at all. We didn't go to radio college or go through like the tribulations of what it takes to go to some shitty little market. I mean, we ended up being on KABC in Los Angeles, and like you're supposed to start off somewhere in Idaho, like we were stealing. I mean, so I just felt like it really wrapped up what we were doing, and it felt appropriate to the time. Like GTA was such a big thing.
Okay, so I interviewed Baltazar Fedelizo. I've got him explaining stuff. It's not essential that I get your thoughts about him or funding. If you want to say something, actually, but it would be cool if you could say something briefly about the idea of Baltazar coming in and funding KBC.
So one of our first guys that ended up helping us was this guy named Balthazar Federizo. I'm sure you've had to have spoken to him as you've done this. He was such a wild dude, and really, he was the first one that saw something in us that thought I should put a couple bucks behind this and like see where it goes. And when I heard that someone wanted to invest in us, like I was blown away, man. I mean, I really thought that we were gonna have to figure out how to like do all these steps and everything just step by step ourselves. But here's this guy that was a renegade. I mean, some of the stories about this guy, from smuggling drugs to his biodiesel America company, where he's taken I don't want to say what he's doing. The guy was running his own business, but he saw something in us, and I was very flattered by that idea.
Okay. So then KBC suddenly, after a month, they told us our ratings went up like 13,000 to 31,000.
Yeah,
And if you could repeat that in the answer, that way we get it in there, because I'm not going to include my
great, great, great.
questioning. And we went from 13,000 to 31,000 in a month, and they had actually said that if we kept going for over 6 months, they were going to actually like hire us and put us on for real, because they were so astonished by the growth. But then suddenly the New York office of ABC Radio pulled the plug and said, nope, sorry, no more pay to play shows. Everybody's got to run reruns from New York overnight. So we lost out suddenly. Thoughts?
So when we made it on to KABC, and we'd had some really good like jumps in ratings. I think we'd gone from somewhere around 13,000. I think the biggest number they gave us was 31,000. So at that point, we'd almost tripled the audience that they normally had there. And they were laying on some pretty nice stuff with us, saying if you continue to do this, we'll be able to like take you guys on as like a regular show. But then, man, everyone gets saved by the Guardian Angels. But we kind of got fucked by the Guardian Angels, because there was this guy, Curtis, I forget the name of the guy, but like they decided that they were going to run like his reruns all across the country on KBC, and it just knocked us out of there. And then we heard about the idea of like internet radio, and we had just lost the ability to have the first gig on KRLA. We'd now been kicked off of this one because like the Guardian Angels, and it just became this idea of like, hey, you can go over here and no one can tell you that you can't say something, and space is virtually like unlimited. So, let's check out this direction.
Okay, so we wound up at LA Talk Radio first, and um, let's see. Okay, the next question was something only I could answer. I'm going through the list of what I made for Bowman to read to me. Do you think being at the dawn of a new technology with podcasting helped get stars to show up as guests?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's no way that these people could have known what a rinky-dink operation they were showing up. So one of our very, very first episodes, we end up with the lead guitarist from Korn. And like, we're excited, like, great, we got the dude from Korn coming in. And then like we find out this dude is taking his tour bus out from Arizona. So he spent like 6 hours on a tour bus to come out to talk to us, to turn it around the next day. Like, that was the first time I legitimately felt kind of bad. Like, oh man, like people are really putting in too much effort to come do our show. Like, I felt bad when someone had to pay, $5 for parking, and this guy had decided that he's going to jump on his tour bus and come all the way across. Like, that was fucking wild.
Okay. Let's see. So then, what do you? Any other thoughts about LA Talk Radio?
LA Talk Radio was a heck of a great place to be, man. Like, I hold them in high regard still today. I mean, like, the guy who runs that place is still doing a great job of making sure that he's putting a whole bunch of different voices out there. The thing that I really appreciated about it was the wild diversity of shows. I mean, there were so many people coming from so many different point of views that it really felt like a place where you could just kind of say and do whatever you wanted. No one was going to, say, hey, that's inappropriate. As long as you gave him his $150, he didn't give a fuck what you said.
Okay. So then, how did we decide to jump though? Because we stayed there a year, and he helped us with our anniversary party at the big show we did at Busby's East, and then suddenly we jumped to New Dissonant Radio, which was started by one of his former clients. Another show host started his own platform out of his apartment in Hollywood.
So one of the guys that ran there that was also on LA Talk Radio with us was a guy named Johnny Dam, who was running the Damage Report. And he had just gotten onto something called Talkers Magazine's Frontier 50. And I was so impressed that, like, this guy who was just on the same platform as we were has now been like, picked up for being someone who's one of the most important people in talk radio. And somehow he let us know that he was going to be opening up his own place. And I think it came down to two things. One, his cost was much less. It's like we went from paying $150 an episode to $50 an episode. So at that point is when we decided that we could put in less money than we're putting in now and have twice as long of a show. So we decided to go from $150 a week to $100 a week. But now we got 2 hours instead of 1 hour. I think in the end, that was the main driving force, because at that point we would get through our 52 minutes once you take out your commercial time, and we still had so much stuff to talk about. And the way that you were able to get guests because of your connections with the paper, like being the entertainment reporter, and we just started having a giant list of people. Like we'd start trying to figure out, well, when can we get this person on? And we'd see, and we're booked for the next like 3 months of guests. So like, when are we going to be able to fit these people on? So the whole idea of adding an extra hour for less money and us being able to double up on like our guests was, I think, really the big reason that we went that direction.
And we also got to go ad free, I think, with New Distant Radio. It was just, we had the full 2 hours.
Yeah, that's true. So there was no time taken out for like, hey, this is Pringles, eat this flavor that doesn't exist anymore. Like,
yeah. So any thoughts about when guests had to show up? Because the LA Talk Radio was at a real office, but Johnny Dam, we were in somebody's apartment, and people had to walk through the apartment, go to a back bedroom, and trust us to get in the room. I'm going to be talking with Paula Bell later today. She was the first woman that we brought on there, and I'll never forget. And she didn't forget either. She thought it was hilarious that I brought it up. That when we first led her back to the studio, when we opened the door, she goes, "Oh, thank God there is a studio here. I thought I was going to get gang raped." And so, any thoughts about that whole setup?
So the New Dissident radio studios, which were like on a very busy street in Hollywood, it's basically at the entrance to that big park everybody likes to walk in, that big pathway there. Yeah, so it was just a madhouse to get in and out of there. So we'd be sitting there trying to figure out like how someone's going to get there. I remember I was so excited. So like my very favorite comedy show of all time is the Upright Citizens Brigade, and at this point you had managed to get on both Ian and Matt, and Ian and Matt. Who's what's Besser's? Matt Walsh. Oh, and Matt Besser. So there's two Matts there.
Yeah.
So the time that we had to wait for Matt Besser, like he complained so bad about driving around for like all the parking and trying to figure out where he was going to go. When he was so mad when he came inside. Like I think that at that point he'd been like a real celebrity, and he wasn't used to having to be out here with like the regular world that I felt like shit when I was bringing them through the studio. And I remember like there was one of those days when the wife of the owner was sitting there in the living room, and she didn't particularly like us to use it as like green rooms or anything. Like there was just no waiting area for people, so we'd like rush him through this kind of dirty apartment, and we get inside there, and we had a great show, but it was just, at that point, it was a little embarrassing. We kept asking him, because he told us when we got there, we were only going to be there like a week or two, and he was going to get us a studio. And then it kind of turned into months and months and months. And by the time that we actually got to go to the studio and really let someone in, I think the first person that we had at the new studio was this baseball player named Jay Johnstone, who was this legendary like prankster for the Dodgers. And the relief that I went over when he showed up that day, like that, man, we have a real place again where, there's not, the smell of fajitas coming from the other room, because she was always cooking, and like, it was a fun experience. I'm glad that we did it, but it was really good to get out of there too.
Well, Johnny was said that I keep having to postpone the actual interview with him, but he said what his main recollection of us was having to chase us for the money. So, that's something, feel free to ask me about also when you interview me. But, just we were always like just barely skating through this whole situation.
So at this point, when we went to New Dissonant Radio, I had now been fired from the newspaper that we worked at, and we're putting in $100 a month to be able to, or $100 a week to be able to do our show. And Brant had a regular job, and you had a regular job, so it's pretty easy for you guys to come up with $33 a week. But I was a terrible scrambling son of a bitch. I mean, so it caused some problems both at LA Talk Radio and New Dissonant Radio and Radio Titans.
Yeah. Okay. So, then there's Paula Bell. I'm skipping that one. The Los Angeles, unless you have a memory about Paula Bell, it might be funny to cut it in. About bringing a woman in for the first time.
I remember Paula Bell being a kind of like a shock female comic, but when she came in there, she was pretty shocked herself.
Yeah, that's good. Good line. So the LA Times paper, they wrote a glowing story about us in 2011, and I'd say that was a real game changer. And also, they kept spotlighting our live events that we would throw as the coolest thing to do for the night or the weekend or whatever. So, any thoughts about hitting the LA Times all those times?
So we were able to get a bunch of press when we first got started. That was pretty cool. One of the first things that we got was a piece on our politics. Do you remember that long piece that they put up on, at the time they were calling us three libertarians because I think that there was a little bit of a muddling on our message, but eventually it became stronger. But that was the first time I had ever had an article written about me or about something I was doing, and that felt really good. By the time it made it to the LA Times as being, oh, here's our Saturday night pick for the best thing to do in LA. I mean, that was just some shocking stuff. I mean, we just went on this string of victories that we had no real right of getting. It's not that our shows weren't great. The people that we were putting on our lineups were just killers from top to bottom. And so we're doing great shows, but you don't really think, how is this big enough that people care enough to call it the best thing to do in LA? That was shocking. The article in the LA Times caused a lot of problems in my life. So I was pretty open with the interviewer and everything that was going on. And then the article comes out, and it was all about how I brought on my weed dealer and all these other things. And then I couldn't show that article to people. Even though it was in the LA Times, I still couldn't bring it to my father-in-law and be like, hey, read this article about us, because there's just embarrassing things that were in it. So it was kind of a double-edged sword in some ways. I think that it made us a little bit more, how should I say this? I think it made us, obviously it made us more visible, but it made us more, I don't know the right way to finish that off. It's, I don't want to, I can't say it in a way that doesn't make me sound like a piece of crap. So let me think about a way of rewording that and coming back to it in a minute.
Okay? All right, no problem. We can always edit. I'm promising every single person the right of refusal of how they come across, and 3 people have flat out asked for their interviews to be redone out of 60. So it's not that big a deal to me. If there's something you want to change.
Okay, cool. I like to think about the right answer for that, because I have it close to my head, I'm just not there.
All right. Okay, so then let me think. Wait. Okay, well, one thing I don't have in here that we need to get across is, because a lot of people have brought it up, is how groundbreaking it was that, podcasting was just relatively new at the time. B, for whatever crazy reason, we were determined to stage these live shows, and we meant it to be promotions for our podcast, but even with the LA Times publicity, it was spotlighting the event. It wasn't really always saying, here's how to listen to it. So I don't even know if it really did that much good for us as far as listenership, but it was pretty amazing that we were making the effort to get some really major stars to do these live shows. I mean, there was, I forget who we had, but there was one show that we sold out our first show at Meltdown Comics, which was maybe next to Upright Citizens Brigade, was the hottest place for comedy in LA. And we had Eddie Pepitone, Maria Bamford, and I forget who else, all in one episode, one live edition. And it was sold out. It was just crazy, first try. And so, any thoughts about us and our attempts to do live events on top of already being groundbreakers with podcasting?
Yeah, it's when I think back on it, I guess it is kind of hard to figure out why we decided to start doing live events. I know that you had been doing stand-up comedy, and I was really jealous of that. And the whole idea of just like maybe getting to get on stage, I instantly got a boner. I'm like, yeah, man, let's do this. Like, let's get on stage and make people listen to us that way. And it just turned out to be really successful. People seemed to like it. I mean, we had that first Meltdown show. We went in there, we had no idea what we were going to do. Like, it's an hour before the show and we're still trying to figure out how we're going to like set up tables for us to be able to see us talk, and like how this was all going to go. And everything just flowed out so smoothly. Like, all of our events went great. I mean, we never had like a disaster show where like, oh my God, that didn't go well at all. They all just built to be bigger and better than the last one. I'd say that moving on from Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, which I couldn't even believe that we got to do a show in the UCB Theater. When we got to do that, that was just mind blowing to me as like such a giant fan of theirs. To actually get to be like on their stage was, again, we didn't deserve to be there. Like, I had never been a stand-up comic. You were doing some shows in your lobby, and somehow I got goaded into coming down there and just like doing a set. And I went down there and I fell in love with being on stage like that. And I pushed for as many live shows as we could get. I mean, I just saw that as like the way I could get back on stage, and let's do it.
So Upright Citizens Brigade, if you can, just so we have it on tape with somebody explaining it, that we got to do it was like our second anniversary show, and it was 30 acts in 60 minutes, which was a concept you came up with. And if you can share some of the memories of, that we had everything from like little kids dancing in costumes to, the hip hop Penguins sketch comedy troupe to, everything in between. It was crazy.
One thing that was cool is that we did a good job of like celebrating our milestones and anniversaries. So we'd had a big party down at Busby's for our first anniversary with LA Talk Radio, and we had a killer lineup for it, a real nice turnout, and the people who were running it had done a nice job of making sure that it worked out successful for us. One thing that I will never forget is the first time that we got to see like the Grand Theft Audio name on the marquee when we pulled up out front of Busby's, and there it was, like the Grand Theft Audio one, like first anniversary party. Like, that was amazing. But then getting to go like the next year and taking it to the Upright Citizens Brigade, at this point we had years of shows now, so we knew so many people. We're trying to put together like our list of like who do we know and who do we know, and our list got so big that came up with this idea of, how many acts can we do in an hour? I mean, if we did 2 minutes an act, we just blew through. We just gave the people so many different types of performers. We had magicians and dancers and rap groups. And I mean, we just had so much different stuff that it was such a fun idea to present. Like, this is the Grand Theft Audio universe, all right here, all randomized, and just letting you see into just a little bit of the different types of worlds that we were touching.
Okay, so how did we decide to start Radio Titans? And and I forget, I could be wrong, and I mean, open to being corrected, but I remember you had a name you wanted to call it Underdog Radio, and I thought I came up with Radio Titans, but maybe that was your second try. I don't remember.
I think that you had some other word that was almost more biblical instead of Titans. Like, and we were looking for words that were big and massive, like things that have power and stuff behind them. And you're right, the original idea was Radio Underdogs, because I did kind of view us as underdogs that, you know, we're gonna have to fight their way up there. But then you took the idea that it needed to be something more powerful than that. And I think ultimately you were right. But I think you had something that was more biblical sounding than Titans, and we just kept coming up with different words. Like, we had this terrible old boss I hated his guts, and the first thing I suggested was he said behemoths wrong. You say behemoths, right? He would say behemoths. So remember the idea of like radio behemoths? I'm just like like radio behemoths. Like, I remember that was one of the ones that we'd pass around too. But Radio Titans just seems like it was from the heavens, and it was big, and it was powerful, and I think that's the reason we went that way.
Okay. So then, when it's my turn to be interviewed, let's make sure that we ask about how the money came about, because it's the story of my grandma and how she made her money. I mean, it was all legit. I don't mean to make her sound like she was a hooker or something, but it's a pretty wild story how she wound up banking all this money, and where it was able to be dispensed like that to me.
Sure.
Anyway, yeah. So we found our first office in Hollywood, in a rather colorful big building in Hollywood and Cahuenga. Any thoughts? Like I've got quite a few funny. Mike Alexander, surprisingly, is the funniest about the building. Just unbelievable. But imagine what a 65-year-old Republican businessman would think about that. It was his description is amazing. Bill Dwyer's amazing. So we've got some pretty good things to jam together. But what was your impression of that property when you first saw it?
So we ended up in this offices down on Hollywood Boulevard and like Cahuenga, which is basically like Hollywood and Vine. I mean, it's about the dirtiest place that people think of when they think of Hollywood. I mean, it's prostitutes and crazy homeless people running around, and it was completely full of that. Some odd things about that place. We would do a lot of standing around outside, like waiting for our guests to show up, because the front door system was just ridiculous. And we'd be out there waiting for someone to come in. And part of the problem became, like, we'd now been there for a while, and all these homeless people had seen you around so much, they kind of started becoming friends with you and stuff. So you had to be real protective of like talking to people, because inside of our building, at the end of our hallway, was like these homeless mental handicap services. So all day long, up and down our halls would just be crazy people banging against the walls and like moaning and making crazy sounds. And you weren't in the studio for a lot of these other shows, but we had crazy stuff. So we have Lance Bass in, and he's on Jason Stewart's show, and they're having a perfectly fine conversation. And you start hearing from the outside, you start hearing like banging against the walls, and like at this point, Lance Bass is a big name for our studio. Like I was like, oh man, like what? I don't want to look embarrassing here, like, but what's going on? But he was so cool about it. Like, it was really fun to have a place that was alive and had its own stuff going on. I mean, not only did we have like the day would start off with us being out front of the door, like waiting to be able to get in, and all the homeless people waiting to get in at 9 a.m. And it would just pick up crazy steam throughout the day. At one point, it ended up being like a gambling house where there was like people running parties in the middle of the night through there, and hookers and drugs. And as much as I'm a good boy, I felt quite at home there.
So Okay, so then, were there any funny reactions from our guests about having to step over, bums and junkies in the stairwells and things like that? Because that's what Mike talks about, and it's pretty damn funny. But did you hear any complaints from anyone ever?
I think that since like I know that we ran the place, but I was kind of like more of the public face of like the people who were coming in there and like running the shows. I think that all of them were like so new to it and so scared of losing the shows also that we just put up with a lot of stuff. I mean, there were things there that we should never have agreed to. Like we were dumb enough to take the room right outside of like their AC unit, so like that, it's when their AC went on, you could hear it through our microphones. I mean, it was just a constant terrible background sound that um, people who were professional would have known about beforehand. But we got suckered into all sorts of stuff. I remember when we found out that like the offices we were in were Doris Day's offices, and like I felt so bad for Doris Day. I'm like, I understand why we're here, like because we're still working our way up and trying to make this stuff work. But Doris Day had to work from this place. Like we had no handle on our door. We had like a broken window between the waiting room and the studio. Uh, the whole place was so janky and terrible, but it was cheap. Like we got hooked up with this dude. Like we went in there and they said, "Yeah, you can have this place for like I don't know, $750 a month or something like that." I'm like, "Yeah, we can afford that. We can do that." Like at that point, it was barely more than what we were paying for like doing our weekly show. I think that all of us looked at it as like, it's not that much more to put in to be able to have maybe a daily show. Could we go from doing a weekly show to a daily show by launching our own place and moving into this janky ass building? And it turned out that we could, and thank God that we did, because it let us have a bunch of our like favorite guests. We'd be like, "Man, this person's so funny, they should be doing their own show. This person's so funny, they should be doing their own show." And it really worked out that we got to help people get started in the same thing that we had such love for.
So here's a few of the shows that I've reached out to the hosts of. I don't know if there's anything I missed, and if there's any out of key shows. Like we don't have the time or ability to do 20 shows discussion. But my thoughts were, I've interviewed Joey Blaney, I've interviewed Bill Dwyer, I've interviewed Jason Stewart and Adam Grotman about Pajama Party, and Maria Shahada I'm going to get her about Little Ethnic Girls once I need that audio from you, and also from Downtown. We owe her from there too. And but anyway, she's willing to talk when she gets her files for whatever reason. So, um, any thoughts about the array of other shows that we brought on? And any
Okay, so
specific
I'll say
members
this.
from the-
I'll say this. As much happiness as I get from having like a named person on the show that was like a Jason Stewart or a Bill Dwyer or like somebody who, is on television, has a following, I actually got a lot more pleasure out of the shows that people, had never had shows before. Like we had Nick and Amy, like who's Nick Cobb, who's, a very successful comic now, but the idea of helping him come on there. And I remember like we'd have conversations where, coming on here and doing an hour of talking about stuff is giving me more stuff to talk about on stage. Like you'd have people like Sip and Savor, like these shows didn't go anywhere, but the idea of giving um, people an outlet to get their words out was so much more important to me than the idea of, oh, Bill Dwyer's got big celebrities coming in. I mean, sure, you get a boner for that, but I really love the idea of the unknown people, because that's what I saw myself and us as. Like I was hopefully using those bigger names to get more followers to find us. And I was hoping that our bigger name would help these smaller places find followers and listeners too. So the idea of having people who believed enough in us from what we did to join us in our new venture was was awesome.
So then, any specific, like, if you can think of either craziest memories or favorite memories of, like, what are a few of the mind-blowing guest memories that you might have where you're like, holy cow, that was big.
So when we got to do our show and bring on some big celebrities, sometimes it always felt good. I mean, we got the time with Cheech and Chong, and that was great. The big ones to me to have in studio was when we got the guys behind Reno 911, when we had on Thomas and Ben, and we're in there, and I think at this point they'd been pretty used to doing a lot of interviews and stuff. And I remember asking them a question that they said, we've never been asked that before. And at that point, I'm like, that's right. Let's talk about things that people have never been asked before. When we had them on and they did a review of their porn movie, because like I had just downloaded the Reno 911 parody porn. And I said, so have you guys watched your parody porn? And to be able to have that conversation, like, uncensored, and for like what it meant to those guys, like as they told us about how they sat there and watched it together, and like that was a big thrill. I really, really enjoyed that.
Okay, so any thoughts about, because you mentioned before, like having funny, enjoying riling me up, and the one rule that I ever had, that I think we followed, unless somebody snuck somebody on that I wasn't aware of. But this was my only rule downtown too. Was I just
Okay, before you say it, I'm gonna try to guess what your only rule was and what you remembered. The only real rule I remember you instituting along the way was we couldn't talk about abortion. You remember that?
That's funny. Bring it up when you interview me, if you can make a note of that, because it actually happened one time and it led to that's when Dylan Brody stormed out of a live taping of Cause Effect, just stormed out. That may be why he hates me. I don't know. But anyway.
So what was the rule?
No, to me, that, yeah, I did say that. And then the other thing was, because Johnny Demm had some shows with porn stars, and I just was like, this is my grandma paid for this. I don't want porn stars as hosts for sure, and as guests either. But I don't know if I made a big deal out of it or it just never happened or what. But when I was downtown, somebody brought it up, and I was like, no, I will never. I don't want that. Period. Sorry. That was my only rule that I could remember, other than maybe the abortion thing.
Yeah, I don't know how you missed me having porn stars on Grand Theft Audio then. We had the most notorious porn star, the worst, most notorious porn star in the world. We had this guy on named Max Hardcore. And I mean, he was, at that point, he'd been in jail for like the terrible, degrading way that he'd been treating women. And one of my favorite episodes, at this point, we were lucky enough to have one of the people from like the Howard Stern show on regularly, this awesome female comic named Rachel Butera, super strong brain, great girl. So I decided it would be great to have like Rachel and Max kind of like spar on air. And man, that was one thing I loved about our show. Like, I loved putting like girls in position to talk to kind of misogynistic guys, and like girls that were mentally sharp and smart, like, and letting them kind of tear into them. Like, I fucking love that shit. One of our co-hosts on the show was this girl named Erica Inez, and she was a little bit on the nerdy side. She definitely claims nerd comedy. That's what she does. And we had this comic on. I won't say who it is. People can go back and try to find these. But he's a real misogynistic comic, popular dude. I mean, like, he's had specials on. Say his name. Yeah, it's Brett Ernst. So like Brett Ernst is, he's a very manly comic. I mean, he's does things from like the Italian like point of view, or like guys are better than girls. And I was just watching the anger build up inside Erica. Like, she's getting tenser and tenser. And then like she just fucking exploded on him on the end about like all the stuff he was wrong on and all the stuff. And he's having to like admit that, okay, yeah, that's not exactly right. And that's not exactly right. And when we got out of that studio, like, I was so proud to have put her in that position where she could, like, you know, fight back against the common bullshit that happens on the comedy circuit all the time. Like, I was very proud of that.
That's great. Okay, I love it. Okay, so I just made notes. I'm going to try and track down the 30 acts in 60 minutes flyer. Unless, do you have a copy of that?
I do, yeah.
Is there any way you can mail it to me with the other stuff, like make a color copy or whatever?
I mean, I have the digital, like,
Oh,
original.
okay, yeah, send me that or whatever, just in case. And then I'm gonna look for the Reno 911 guys. I want to find Rachel Butera, if you could reach her perhaps, because you knew her better than I did. And I'm gonna reach out to Brett Ernst because he was a guest a few other times also, and he made me, hopefully he'd be up for laughing about, you know, having that what you described happen.
The
Anyway,
other things I was proud about from those Radio Titan days was like giving people a platform to be out there and continue doing their things. Like at this point, like I know I said the last guy's name, and I don't really want to say this guy's name. But I'll tell you, but cut this out. This is Russ Guten, okay? So like we would have these young comics on, and like I know a couple of them who were close to the point of like quitting and not wanting to carry on. And like the idea that we took an interest in them and got them on the air, like I know comics today who would have quit, or at least had threatened to quit if they didn't have us supporting them and saying that they were great. And the idea of being able to put that type of strength inside somebody, that there's people who believe in them and want them to succeed. I mean, I'm all about the people around me getting better, and like as much as I'm addicted to people online or whatever, I always like to leave them feeling stronger and more powerful at the end. So I think that we did a good job of empowering people into thinking that, you know, they can be more and they can do more.
you have some sort of noise coming in the back there. Do you hear it?
What's it sound like?
It sounds
Is
like
it,
some voices from a
so
TV or something, maybe, I don't know.
It's not, man. I got this crazy woman who lives across the street from me that
Oh.
just fucking
All right,
waits.
no sweat.
Sorry.
That's fine. Okay, so then we're almost done, but here's the tough question. Okay, so if you could explain, you said you were willing to talk about it, and I'm going to give you the same right of shaping how this comes across as I would anyone else, because there's no point in, you know, beating up on you, and it wasn't as cut and dry as I originally was so mad about. But what happened at the end with the money? I mean, as far as like, if you could explain the, because you had some pretty good reasons not to pay initially, but I mean, what if you could address all that now, and try to do it in chunks where I could cut it up and make sense of it rather than one long story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Yes.
how Radio Titans end? At least my part of it there. At the last couple of months that we were in downtown, or that we were in Hollywood, I'm gonna start over. So Radio Titans, you know, when we were there in Hollywood, it did come to an end. I take a lot of the blame for what happened there. I mean, certainly I was playing things way too close to the edge on things. Like they had decided to up our rent. I mean, kind of. What had happened was the guy that signed us up to stay there wasn't really authorized to do it. He gave us this deal at a rate that we could afford. We try to pay the rent. Turns out the guy disappears, and they jack the price on us crazy high. So they come down there and they say, okay, this is what it's going to cost us, and what's going to cost you to stay here. And at that point, I'm like, okay, but you got to fix this, and we're going to pay that. You got to fix that if we're going to pay that. And they agreed. They said, okay, we'll get you like this new glass on the door. We'll get you your handles. We'll get these things covered. And for a couple of months, like I just kind of thought they were still going to do that and we'd pay and stuff. But then eventually, like we just kind of ran out of cash. I mean, we had been charging people to do shows. We had a Tea Party backer that threw a whole bunch of money behind us. And then it just like got too expensive and stuff. And I decided that these guys aren't doing what they said they're going to do. So I'm not going to pay rent. Like it was I saw it as like a tenants right thing. Like it was causing us to lose business. People who didn't really want to, pay for and be in a studio as janky as ours. Like when we've been telling them now, like, oh, it's going to get nicer. It's going to get nicer. It's going to get nicer. Then it just never did. I kind of became resentful, and funds were a little bit on the short side. So I just said, fuck these people. And then they started sending eviction notices, and I just threw them in the garbage, and thought that I'd figure it out later because, more money will show up somehow. There'll be another article in the Times, or there'll be some other person who wants to be able to, back us. But I just played it too close to the edge, and eventually it did catch up with us to the point of like, I think you got a call, and instead of instead of me being able to like throw the eviction notice in the trash, they actually called you. Then kind of the jig was up, like
No, actually, what it was I came over for a pajama party, which was Mondays at 10. And for whatever reason, they had posted a big sign on the door saying 3-day notice to pay or quit. And that was the thing, my beef with them, because we managed to get them off our backs. I mean, we had to leave, but it was pretty amazing. We managed, my recollection, and I'm trying to feed this to you and see if you can comment about it, was, okay, they should have, and ask me about this when it's my turn down the line. They should have called me along the way, not just left a note at the door. When it was turning into 7 or 8 months, so I think it was 10 months that we owed them by the end, because we were there about 14 months. And they were like, they never called me, they never wrote me, and and I was the one whose name was on the lease. I was the one, they had all my info. And so I was furious that they, I mean, I was mad at you, but I was furious that they had never contacted me otherwise. I'm like, that's on you guys. How the hell do you not call me or whatever, And and so anyways, my recollection of it was pretty much the only the thing that would have made me never want to talk to you again is if you hadn't been, you manned up at least and went down there with me and told them that I was unaware that we weren't paying the rent, and which was the truth. And you owned up to that. And so they got off my back. They were threatening to sue and ruin our credit. And I was like, I'll be damned if I'm going down like that. But then I think my recollection is this, and I'm not going to name the management company. So if this story is better than the reality, I say let's go with this, because I think it's kind of a fun way of how I remembered it. My recollection was they were going to come down on you, and then you said, yeah, but you know what? We saved you guys way more money than what we owed you because we helped you bust that guy that was renting illegally. My recollection is that that guy had rented about 10 different businesses, including ours, in cash for $1,300, 2.5 months at a time rent, and they didn't know any of it was going on. And so they lost $13,000 to this guy minimum, at least with that one payment alone, payment cycle. And so when they said you owe us $7,900, one of us said, and I'm willing to say, have it be you that takes the credit if you want to do it, was like, well, yeah, but we saved you 13,000 right off the bat, and you guys were such bad managers, you never did any repairs, etc. So in reality, you owe us money, and they wound up just throwing their hands up in the air, and never came. I don't think they ever sued you or shredded your credit either. I think they just decided to call it a wash because they realized. And I think I also threatened them that I knew everybody in media, and I said, if you want an article about your, building that's overrun with drug dealers and junkies and a gambling operation, then go ahead, sue Jake. And I think then they just said get out of here and dropped it. Is that any of that?
So I think at the end of like our Radio Titans Hollywood days, I think we owed somewhere around 10 months rent or so. This had just snowballed on and on and on. And it got to a point where like they're trying to get you to come into the office with them. And you were trying to get me to go in there. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to face this. But I did. I went with you. And I'm a pretty decent arguer. It's like a good villain you can always agree with because like you can see a little bit of his logic, you know, like, oh, that makes sense. I had just enough logic in there to be a good villain on this. Like they had not done our repairs like they promised to do. I had saved them a whole bunch of money by letting them know, like us, that they had all these illegally rented out places there, and they wouldn't have been making money off of any of these places if I hadn't let them know that like all this stuff was going on. And they're threatening like, oh, we're gonna sue you, you owe us all this money. And it just became like, I think we had such good points there on saving them the money, on not doing the repairs. And I think you may have thrown in a little bit of a threat on like, you know, I'm in the media and I can kind of let the story come out and let everybody know that you have, you know, drug dealers and prostitutes and all these other things here. I think it just became easier for them to think, let's let this be a loss. Let's let these guys go away. Now that we're past like the 7 years on it where they can do something about it, it's much easier to talk about it. But I will say, like, for the last 7 years, I have been a little bit worried that they're gonna like say, you know what? Fuck those guys.
Well, you know what's funny to me is that building never like they did some sort of renovating to it at one point.
That's
But
right. This is how I fucking got off in the end. So the people who were underneath us were doing repairs and they shot like a bolt into the bottom of the ground that like hit my foot in the middle of the of an air of a show. Do you remember that? Like I felt it like cracked the bottom of my foot and like they didn't, and like those people weren't like, you know, they weren't supposed to be there either. So they didn't have any of their fucking permits or anything. So I think it would have been a much bigger problem for them if I'd gone forward with like my threat on like the illegal construction that was going on there. That they decided that was like, okay, let's just let these guys go, because my foot was messed up for like 2 years after that. I completely forgot about that.
yeah, no, but I was going to say that building, you know, that's granted, yeah, it's around a bunch of drugs, that area, but it is still pretty prime real estate in the world estimation of Hollywood. To say 2 blocks from Hollywood and Vine, you would think that they would do something with it and keep it going. That building's been boarded up for years,
And
and
there were great things in the building with this. I mean, being above that big comedy club there, the oh man, what club was
I
that?
know
That was
what
yeah,
the
being
iOS.
being above the IO West really made it feel like it was a legitimate comedy place. Like people would walk right outside of our door and they'd be right at the entrance to that place. And it kind of made the whole thing feel, you know, like I said, legitimate. But what was going on there was crazy. I mean, there was a guy on our hallway that thought that he was having paintings come alive with demons coming out of the floor and the ground in the middle of the night. And there was a guy upstairs that I know was just taking advantage of young boys. I mean, you've never seen a casting agent that was creepier than this dude. The people that were coming in and out of his place, like it was, I think that we may have been the purest thing in that building. And we were pretty bad. I think we may have been the purest thing going on there.
Okay, so the last night, like I worked it out with them that I could be out by, I think I had to be out by a Tuesday morning. And so I called together a bunch of people, and thank God we have video of this and a great photo from it. So I'm going to put this in. But we did one last pajama party, and then I basically told these people, let's just march out with our stuff and help me clear out, because I didn't know how I was going to get out of there on my own. And I was so mad I didn't want you and Branch involved. But so anyway, I'm not sure if you were there or not. I think you guys showed up and I just kind of like ignored you. So I don't know. That may not even be a good story for the film. If you have a thought about it, that's fine. But if not, I'll skip it over it. But then I was going to say, it was a couple weeks later that Brent calls me and says, "Hey, we won. We were named one of the Frontier 50 on LA Talk. I mean, on talkers.com." And that was mind blowing, because I wound up, if you have a thought about this, it's fine, but I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, because it is what it is, and my reaction, you know, was probably somewhat outsized because I'm manic depressive and wasn't treated at the time. But I was pretty suicidal for a couple of days, and I wound up going to the Montreal Comedy Fest because I had already bought the tickets in the hotel, and and that saved my mindset there. Just laughing for a few days, I got over it to some degree. But then a couple weeks later, I get this call. Like I said, Brent calls me or writes me and said, "Check this out," and he sends me the notice with our picture. So, any thoughts about getting on the Frontier 50 at such a weird time?
So we had kind of bad timing. It seems like every time something like kind of incredibly amazing would happen, there'd be a giant setback. A couple of examples. One, like when Grand Theft Audio moved to the Skid Row studios, we'd been down there doing the show for maybe about 2 months or so. Somehow they got us like an article in the 50 most interesting people of Los Angeles issue. And this article comes out, and I remember reading it in our new studios at Radio Titans. Like the whole thing was about Skid Row Studios and about what Grand Theft Audio was doing there and like the freedom that we were getting from it. And now, like that day, we had signed our contract to move over to our new studios. So like here was some press that wasn't going to do us any good. This is pushing everybody to Skid Row Studios. There's nothing on here that says Radio Titans or Grand Theft Audio Radio.com or any of that type of stuff. So that was like a bad setback that we got put in that. That's when you weren't really part of the show. Like at this point, you'd kind of quit the show like 3 or 4 times over different things. I remember you decided you wanted to be like a Catholic comic, and you didn't want to have any type of bad things come from the show that could like kind of hurt you. So when we moved down there and moved, that's when we really went to like the daily format. We'll get that article, and then it didn't do us any good. Then we had this giant blow up, and Radio Titans Hollywood like doesn't exist anymore. And then it was like 3 days later that we got this thing that said that, man, we're like named to the top 50 most like important people in internet broadcasting, and it was just like mind blowing. I was like, man, what did Carl do to do this? Because like you were the world's greatest beggar. I mean, you can kind of, make anything happen. I just couldn't believe it. So I hit up Brant, and I'm like, man, I fucked this shit up again, because now here we are at a place where if you're named in the 50 most important people, like you should be able to turn that into something productive. There has to be like, like number 51 on the list who wants to move up or something, that wants to hire you or something. But I got nothing good out of that ever. I don't feel like there was ever any like positive thing that came out of it. I thought of myself, like to go back to Talkers Magazine, because they discontinued the list after it. Like they've never made another one. So we're the very last people that were ever added to like the Frontier 50 list. And I want to go back to them and be like, hey, let's do a profile on us. But I don't know, man. Maybe we'll do this movie and people will give a shit about it then,
Yeah. Well, and then I don't know if you want to comment. I'm pretty much done, other than if you want to talk about what you did afterwards, because you mentioned you had. Did you really have Pete Davidson once as a guest?
Oh yeah, I mean we had some huge.
Yeah, so talk about what you did right after.
So some of the things that we got to do there, like we got to have some big guests come on after we had.
You opened, but explain what you did. I'm saying you opened an operation.
Yeah, so Radio Titans went its direction. Grand Theft Audio went its way, and we opened up No Filter Studios. And the idea was there going to be like no filters on anything that we said. And we ended up with some big guests coming through there still. I mean, at that point, like we ended up with Pete Davidson coming through. We ended up with like a bunch of people that we'd had on the show before. But it wasn't the same. I mean, at this point, like that I felt so tainted by things that I didn't even like showing my face around places. I'd go out to some places, and some of our old hosts, like I will feel bad about the way things ended up with me and one of our hosts named Helen Hong of Little Ethnic Girls. Like, I think that they felt so betrayed by like how things just were like taken out from under their feet that they could never really like forgive me. And so I don't hold a grudge against them. I get it. I fucked up. But at that point, like I didn't really have the confidence to make it continue on, even though we're still getting big guests coming through. Like another like good name that came through that side, like I know we had him on our show like back in Hollywood, but we still got like John Daly through there, and some pretty good size comedic names. You
Okay.
remember Daly?
I don't remember, because what I did was,
You would just book people and you couldn't come in because like we were doing 5 days a week on the show. You still had to be at the studios, at your work, at your office. It's
yeah.
like you would still book big names for us on days that you weren't even there. And
I don't think I helped you with No Filter though, because I
no,
was
no, not on No
yeah
Filter.
yeah.
You were gone by then. We had some help from other people. One of the people that helped me get guests come through there was Russ Gooten, because like he was a big contributor and helper to the show. Another one, in fact, the guy that got me Pete Davidson was Daryl Wright.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think because what I did was, I was like I called together a few of my friends like Adam and Christina, and I said, hey, we should restart operations as Radio Titans, but they all said take 6 months and really think things through how you do it, etc. Don't just rush into it. And so you did that while I was like doing nothing for a few months. But anyway, but I think that covers everything. Unless there's anything else you want to say, that covers everything from what we did together.
All right, I'll just say this, like Carl, I didn't deserve to do any of this stuff. Like I would have just been a schmuck who decided to not move into entertainment at all. Had you not asked me to embark on this adventure with you, my life would be completely different. I thank you from the bottom of my heart that you had any want of doing this with me. I am so blessed from the times that we got to go up into the Zeppelin, to the time that we're sitting backstage at comedy theaters, to the times we're trying to figure out how to, put one guest in front of another because we just had so many people that wanted to be with us. I am blessed by my journey that I've had with you. We had a rough, 7 or 8 years there where we didn't talk after this. And I will hold you in my heart forever as someone that I genuinely love for expanding the horizons of my life. And I thank you.
Thank you, man. Same to you. Talk about the Zeppelin. Do we have any footage of that?
I have pictures.
I know pictures I found. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but I don't
talk about that because that is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the cool things about doing the job was that we kept getting free stuff and offers to go out and do things because people just need press, So we got hooked up with a Zeppelin ride. I mean, like, look, I know so many people have been on blimps and you've seen them out there, but Zeppelins are super rare. And we got to go on a Zeppelin ride all over Long Beach, going above the Queen Mary and just hanging out with our heads out the window up in the air. It was just one of those things. Again, I go back to the idea of all the time that we didn't really deserve to be there, and we didn't really deserve to be there. But we made the absolute amazing best of all of it, and it was just one of those things where you just felt like so lucky. Like it was one of the luckiest journeys of my life to be able to do this stuff.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna hit pause.
Cool.